social media, she has no cell phone. And in June, on my 50th birthday, I get a message from her, Miss Erin, happy birthday. My parents said, I can see you for your birthday. And so I went and had lunch with her right after my birthday, and she said, could you come back again? Could we set up a time for you to come again, because I'm really lonely. Talk about lonely. I mean, this is a depth of loneliness that I don't think I've ever seen in a child. And so we went out again in July, and then she was supposed to call me at the end of July, and I didn't get a call, and one day I just felt in my gut I need to go see her. So I drove the hour from my house to hers and showed up at the door, and our whole family was there. And Dad invites me in and says, hey, have lunch with us. And at the end of lunch he says, we're going to do her quinceañera in Honduras in our village. Would you come? Well, I taught in Montana until Thursday of last week. I had to be in Ocean Shores Monday. I said, yeah, I'm coming. So I flew from Helena, Montana to Salt Lake City to SeaTac, flew out on Friday morning to Honduras, spent one day in Honduras for this little girl's quinceañera. Do you know I was her only friend at her quinceañera? I was the only American, I was her only friend. And to see her eyes when I showed up in the airport in not Ciguatepeque is her town in the mountains, but San Pedro Sula is the airport I flew into, to see her eyes when I showed up. And her older sister said, you have no idea. You absolutely made our year. I flew to Honduras for 48 hours. Y'all, you are changing lives every single day. And you never know who the melody is in your classroom, who's so alone. And you just showing up for them and seeing them and being present for them is absolutely going to change their lives. And I know that's who I am for Melody. And my heart breaks for her. And she's finally able to go to school, so she actually starts school tomorrow at a Christian school. And I hope her parents will allow her to continue to be there. But you never know what the stories are of the students when they go home. And I'm so glad. I'm exhausted, y'all. I'm exhausted. Flying, I don't know if you've flown overseas, especially in the middle of COVID, to a third world country. By the way, they had no running water or electricity in their community either. So I'm tired, and it was worth it. It was worth it to see her face on Saturday at her quinceañera. So that's kind of where I've been. In all the trainings that we have done together, for those of you who've been with me, we always start with gratitude. And so I want to invite you. My gratitude today is that I get to do what I love. I get to do what I love. I get to continue working with young people, and the teacher is my favorite thing in the world. But I want you to think about today, what is the thing that you're grateful for? What is the thing you are most grateful for? And I want you to turn and tell somebody in your vicinity, what is that thing that you're most grateful for this morning? Go. For those who haven't heard me, I want to give you just some of the science around gratitude. And I know that I had forgotten that y'all work Character Strong School, but I also work for Character Strong. I juggle a lot of balls, but that's one of them. And so I know gratitude is a huge piece of Character Strong work too. But I want to offer to you the science of gratitude. Gratitude is like a muscle. Gratitude is something that you can practice and develop. Those of you who have heard my story before know I was a ball player. I call myself a baller because I played for 40 years. So if you just played high school, you get to say that you played basketball. I played for 40 years, so I call myself a baller. But if you ask me to shoot a free throw, I'm going to catch the ball, spin it twice, bounce it twice, spin it twice, snap. And I've shot 100,000 free throws. So my body doesn't have to think about it. I just naturally switch into spin, bounce, spin, shoot. Every time. And I can't change that up at this point because I've shot 100,000 shots that way. Do you know, gratitude is like that. The more you practice gratitude, the more your body will naturally be grateful. And here's the best news about gratitude. Gratitude actually changes your brain chemistry. And it creates a positive neural network. Why is that important? Because not only do you need that right now, your students are going to need that right now. Not only was the last year hard for you, the last year was hard for your students, and they're going to show up super anxious for school. And for your seniors, it's going to feel like the first day of school again. And so I just want to invite you to think about how could you practice gratitude in your classrooms every day. Whether it's just you take a minute up front for every student to do what I just did, turn and tell your neighbor. Whether it's you have a gratitude journal and it's their entrance activity when they come in. Figure out a way to practice gratitude in your classrooms because your students need that positive network right now. So I want to offer that, number one. Number two, I want everybody to hold your hands up. Like you're getting water out of a stream, okay? I want you to picture the things that you are best at, the skills and talents that you have. I want you to picture them physically in your hands right now. Picture those things that you're best at. And I will tell you, I already told you one of them is basketball. For me, another one is speaking languages. There's nothing like being a giant black woman speaking Spanish in Tepeque, Honduras, to freak people out. Another one for me is music. Where's my choir teacher again? I saw you earlier. Where are you? Yeah. Choir saves my children. We love to sing in our house, and choir teacher, thank you so much for all the children you're saving. But music is another thing that's in my hand. I've written about 100 songs in 4 languages. What are the things that you are great at, that you love? You don't have to be the best to be great at them. I want you to picture them in your hands. Put your hands down. I want to invite you that when we talk about equity, we often start with where we are weak. We often start with our deficits. I want to challenge you today to think about what are you bringing to your classrooms that often is not in your job description. It was not in my job description that I write music, and yet I knew when I was hired to teach French immersion to middle school children without a textbook, y'all, they gave me no textbook, and I had my students for 5 hours of every day. I had to pull from somewhere. So I said, okay, I love music, I love dance, I love drama, theater, my theater people. My kids are all theater buffs too. I knew that I needed to start using those things that were in my hands, and I did. That's how I wrote my French curriculum. I wrote music, and I wrote a play each week. There are things in your hand that are not in your job description that I want you to tap into this year. Because here's the deal, when you tap into that thing that you're really passionate about, your students will feel it. Your students, so if you like to play basketball, I'll tell you, one of the reasons basketball is in my hand, I did not grow up in a black community. So I don't talk like a lot of urban black kids. That was not my life experience. But I'll tell you what, because I was a baller, I would get out on the court, whether I taught high school or middle school, and just kick somebody's butt in front of everybody. And the respect that I got in my classroom was monumental. Now, not all of you can do that, but you gotta use what you have. If you're an artist and you love art, but you're teaching history, how could you use your love of art to connect to students? I believe everything in your hands is good for something, and you all have something in your hands. Here's the other reality. Your students all have something in their hands too. So I want to invite you, on top of the gratitude, to think about how could you do that activity with students in the first 48 hours of school? What's in your hands? Now here's another truth. My husband is a freshman, they call him the freshman whisperer. He's an ex-football player, giant human. Freshmen do not mess with him. Now he's the most gentle giant you'll ever meet on the planet, like super teddy bear. But he doesn't look like it at first. So freshmen do not mess with him, but he loves his kids. Freshmen think they suck at everything, or they think they are the man. Right, there's one or two. There's no middle ground with freshmen. Either I suck at everything or I am bad. And so some of your freshmen are gonna need some help seeing that they actually have something in their hands. So I want to invite you to be a mirror to reflect back their beauty. I call myself a treasure hunter. One of the things that I do in the first 48 hours of school, maybe 72 hours depending on how many students I have, whether I have 50 or 150 students, I have a clipboard. You can do this on an iPad. I have the name of every single student in my class, and I am determined to find a treasure in every child in the first week of school. Every single child. And as soon as I see that talent, that gift, that jewel, I write it down. I type it out so that it's next to that kid's name. How many of you can tell within the first day of school who's going to be that kid that you may need to call home about? Anybody? You can tell? Okay, good. I love those kids, by the way. Those are my favorite students, but I can always tell that first day, the kid that's going to push my buttons. Do you know, those are the kids that I'm going to find treasure in first. I'm very intentional about that, because I want that to be my first memory of the child. Here's another thing that I don't do. If I taught 10th grade, and the 9th grade teachers came to tell me, hey, watch out for Johnny or Susie or Juan, I was like, I don't want to hear it. Stop talking. Stop talking. I did not listen to those kinds of messages from other teachers. I wanted to make my own assessment of students. So I just want to offer, be really careful how you talk about students and also how you're hearing other people talk about students. And it's why I was really a treasure hunter and intentional about putting something positive. And then here's the other thing I would do. I couldn't call all my students' families because I had 150 sometimes. But I would intentionally call the ones that I knew probably had never gotten a good phone call home. And I would say, hey Mom, I just watched Julian do this amazing thing yesterday. What an incredible young man. And what do you think that did with that mother? Call it out if you have an idea. What do you think happened with that mom?
Pride.
Pride. What else?
Smiled.
Smiled. What else? Trust. Yeah. And so here's the deal. That kid that you can tell right away in that first 24 hours of class probably has been a knucklehead in some places, has probably never gotten a good phone call home. And once I make that great phone call home right away, there is a trust and a connection with that mom. It's very rare that I can't keep that mom on my team for the rest of the year. But if I don't make that phone call, and my first phone call is 6 weeks in, you know what, this kid is being enough, then it's really hard to build trust. And so I just want to invite you, just a little strategy to think about, okay, what's in the hands of your students, especially those students that come in. And the other thing my rule for myself is when a student shows up and they're acting a fool, I always ask myself why. Okay, what's going on? And I make sure to take that child out in the hallway and say, you know what, can you help me understand what's going on with you? And inevitably there's something else happening. And so before I discipline, I'm always asking why. I'm always checking in with students to figure out what's your story? What's your story? Now you can't do that always, but I just want you to lean into that why first. So number one, gratitude. Secondly, what's in your hands. Third, we have talked a lot about brave spaces when I've talked to you. And so I want to invite you to do something in your classrooms this year. For the last 20 years, I don't talk about classroom rules at all. I've gotten away from classroom rules because I think that sounds really punitive. And it's often about me being the big dog and them being down there. And so I have spent a lot of time thinking about how to frame how we're going to do our work. And so I talk in my classroom about community agreements. And we actually designed those together. So we spent the first week really talking about what do you need to be your best and bravest self in this classroom? What do you need to be your best and bravest self in this classroom? And I want to offer several, and I've talked about this in the trainings that I've done with you all, but I want to offer, it's not just about adults. We need brave spaces for students too. And so I want to offer that this is a great way to build trust and build relationship with your students, is to co-create. How are we going to do our work together? And what that means is you as the adults are also going to need to model whatever you co-create. So if you say we're going to have a growth mindset in here, teachers, we love to talk about growth mindset for students. We don't always like to live it out though for ourselves. We don't like to make mistakes as teachers. We don't like to look stupid in front of students. Well, maybe some of y'all do. I think that's why my husband's the freshman whisperer, because he loves messing up in front of kids and just being goofy. But I just want to offer, community agreements is a way that I frame this conversation. And one of them is, learning is going to be uncomfortable in my classroom. There are going to be times when you are uncomfortable. Guess what? There are times when I'm uncomfortable as a teacher. And we are going to push through discomfort. That's just inevitable. My second community agreement is, my agreement to them is I will never ask you to do what I'm not willing to do. I will never, and so here's my rule for myself. I can't yell at you if you're late if I'm going to be late. I can't yell at you for not bringing your supplies when I show up at staff meetings and I don't have my stuff. I'm just keeping it real. I'm talking about me here, okay? That was just kind of my rule for myself, is that I've got to lead by example. And guess what? Somehow students know how y'all are when you're not in the classroom. I don't know how, but they can sniff it. They can sniff it out. And so I just want to invite you to think about what are those things that you think are necessary to be really brave for yourself. Invite your students to that. The other community agreement in my classroom, whether I'm working with adults or kids, is no shame, blame, or guilt. No shame, blame, or guilt. Shame, blame, and guilt are not useful tactics. They may feel really good, that pound of flesh. They do not motivate anyone, not adults, not children, to learn. That's why Brene Brown is a millionaire. Because we have done so much harm to one another by shaming, blaming, and guilting. And so I want to offer that if we're going to create the kinds of learning environments where students are able to really be brave, shame, blame, and guilt are not useful. So take those off the table. I want to offer that you're going to make mistakes. And that when you or your students make mistakes, I am sorry. I don't know if I shared this story with you in either of the times that I was with you, but my oldest son is severely dysgraphic. And how many of you have heard of dysgraphia? Okay. Now, most people have heard of dyslexia. Many people have not heard of dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is basically the written form of dyslexia. So his head, his brain, and his hand do not talk to each other. And so I want you to imagine not being able to write what your head is thinking. His handwriting looks like a first grader, kindergarten first grade. It always has. He's really struggled with handwriting. And so he had a 504 plan starting in the 4th grade. He needed a computer. He needed extra time on things. So he gets to senior year of high school. He's the star singer. He's the star football player at his school. And he decides to take an elective. And it's the first day of the elective. And the teacher asks him to do fill out some sort of document. And the next day, he comes back to class, and the teacher starts class in this way. I don't know whose paper this is, but whoever you are, by the time you get to high school, you ought to be able to write your name so I can read it. And then goes on. Whoever this is, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're a high school student. You ought to be able to write your name at least. And she goes to say one more thing, and my son stands up in the very back of the classroom, and he said, "That's my paper. And if you had read my 504 plan, you would know that I need a computer if you can't read my handwriting." And he stormed out of class. And he called me, and at the time, I was a district administrator in a district about 2 hours away. And he said, "Mom, you're going to be so mad at me. I just stormed out of my class." I was like, "What?" He'd never done that before. I said, "What happened?" And he begins to tell me. I said, "Oh, buddy, you are not the one in trouble right now." But guess what? I was about to be honored by President Obama the next day. And so we were going to be on a plane. I didn't have time to talk to his teacher. And so I sent the teacher a message. Now, my son is prone to hyperbole. And so I didn't want to take his exact word for it. I wanted to give her a chance to explain herself. And because I couldn't imagine a teacher shaming a child in front of the whole class like that. And so I sent this email, and my mom was sitting next to me on the plane to DC, and I said, "Mom, read this. You're a teacher. Tell me, am I being too harsh?" She said, "Oh, honey, that's so kind." She said, "I don't know that I could have been that kind." I said, "Okay, I'm just trying to give her an out." And I walked through what my son had shared with me, and here was the response in writing to me. Knowing, I think she had to know I was a teacher. "If your son was offended by what I said, I'm sorry. Y'all, can I tell you that's not an apology? Don't do that. Do you know my son self-sabotaged his entire second semester of senior year? He almost didn't graduate from high school because he decided that day, I am stupid and I should be ashamed of myself. Even though he stood up for himself and said, I have a 504 plan, he self-sabotaged. The only reason my son graduated is because my parents decided to pick him up from school every day, bring him to their house and make sure he got his homework done. And they physically brought his homework to the school. If you are offended by what I said, that is not an apology, y'all. When we mess up, which we're going to, your students are going to mess up. Let's model, I am sorry. So important. We're not good at that as a country right now. I'm just going to offer. This is not just a school thing. But I want to offer, in a brave space, we have to be willing to apologize. And it has to be an authentic apology. Last thing, in a brave space, for community agreements with my students, I invite them to curiosity. So you don't have to agree with me as a teacher. Now, I grew up in a time in the 70s and 80s where whatever teacher said was the word. And your job was to just repeat what teacher said on every test. How many of you grew up in that time? Anybody grew up in, okay, yeah, I'm not alone, okay. But I want to invite my students to curiosity. So if I say something that you don't agree with, as long as you can show up to me with humanity, as if I'm a human being, and not to say, Miss Jones, you're full of, right? As long as you don't do that, as long as you show up to me with, hey, Miss Jones, I disagree with you on this. As long as we can do it in a civil way, be curious. I want to invite us to be curious. When a student shows up to you and they say something that is diametrically opposed to who you are and what you believe, instead of saying, I can't believe you said that, say, hey, you know what? You said something in class today, and I really want to understand where you're coming from. I don't understand how you came to that. Let's get curious about one another. So I want to offer, number one, gratitude. Number two, what's in your hands, both for you and your students. Number three, community agreements that lead us to being our best and bravest selves. Number four, we're going to practice this, grounding. So if you have anything in your hands, put it down. If you have anything in your hands, put it down, put it on the seat next to you. Sit up as straight as you're able to wherever you're sitting. Don't have to be perfectly straight, but sit up as straight as you're able to. Get your feet as flat on the floor as possible. How many of you would say that when you're tired or angry or frustrated, you say dumb stuff? I say dumb stuff! And my poor husband is the one that gets most of it, y'all, okay? I feel so bad for him. This is why he's getting freshmen, because he's got to deal with me. But one of the things that I have learned is if I can just get myself grounded when I feel myself getting emotional, it really helps me focus and be more thoughtful. So, any ladies in here trained in Lamaze breathing at some point? Anyone Lamaze breathing? Okay, it means you got to be old. But old. We had to go through these Lamaze breathing classes, and I was like, breathing. I'm trying to deliver a baby. What does breathing have to do with it? Breathing has everything to do with it. When you can slow your body down and breathe deeply, it allows you to focus on the task at hand, whether that's delivering a baby or teaching children. And I want to invite us, if we could, when we get tired during the day, when we're frustrated, for whatever reason, whether it's the administration has asked you to do something that you think is crazy, or whatever it is, I want to invite you to this practice called grounding in. So we're just going to take 30 seconds. I want you to focus all of your energy on listening to the air as it goes in and out of your body. That means you actually need to be breathing. So don't stop breathing when I start, just keep breathing deeply. I'm going to cue us in by saying, take a deep breath in, blow it out. I will count to 30 in my head. Y'all keep breathing. Don't hold your breath for 30 seconds. I'm not trying to carry anybody out of here today. And then I'll cue us back in by saying, take a deep breath in, blow it out. If you are able to and feel comfortable, close your eyes just to eliminate distractions. Otherwise, find a spot on the wall, either on the side or behind me, and focus on that. Okay, take a deep breath in, blow it out. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. Open your eyes, stretch, don't hit anybody next to you. I want to invite you. I teach all of my students, whether they're 4 years old or 84 years old, to do this. If you could just stop long enough to take a breath. Imagine how different conversations would be between politicians if they just stopped and ground in. Sometimes for 5 minutes. They need to ground in for about 5 minutes, I think. But imagine if we could just stop and slow down before we respond to a student, before we respond to a colleague, to our partner, our spouse, before we respond to that tweet that says, I cannot believe they posted that. Before you do that, and word vomit all over the page, I want to invite you to ground in. And here's the other thing that's really important. I want to invite you to train your students to ground in. And here's the beautiful thing. I just taught you one version of, there's lots of, you can just Google ground in strategies. But I want to invite you, some of you may feel like this is woohoo and it's mushy stuff. Breathing changes how you show up. It's why as an athlete, I can think about, I used to have emotional asthma. And so if we were losing a game or I just missed a big shot or made a big shot and we won the game, I would sometimes I'd stop breathing. And my coach would stop and put his hand on my head and just say, Erin, breathe slow. And the coach would model that. Right? It works as an athlete, but I will argue that it works in every other space too. If we would just slow down and deeply breathe, so much could change about how we interact with one another. So I want to invite you to share those strategies with your students. So gratitude. What's in your hands? Brave spaces, community agreements, and then ground in. I want to invite you to practice those in your classrooms. That is a great beginning to this equity work. How do we make sure that every student has the strategies they need to be able to thrive in their classroom? Last thing I want to share is there's been a lot of conversation at the national level, I don't know about your district, around learning loss over the last year. I want to offer that I actually hate that phrase. I think we've all learned a lot. I think our students have learned a lot. It may not be testable stuff. But I want to invite us, instead of thinking about learning loss, to start the year by asking students, what have you learned in the last year and a half about yourself, about your family? And it may be good and bad stuff, y'all. It may be good and bad stuff, but what have you learned? What have we learned about ourselves? I want to invite you as educators to think about, what did you learn about your own self, about how you learn? Some of y'all learned that you do not like technology. Actually, you probably knew that already before this, but some of you learned that, wow, I'm actually pretty good at technology. I didn't think I was. Some of you learned how to manage your time a little bit differently. Others of you learned how to access different tools and apps. Some of you realized you were not good at work-life balance, and you had a hard time separating what was happening at school from what was happening at home because you were trying to mitigate these two very different environments. I believe we all learned a lot in the last year and a half, and what I worry about is that we'll get so focused on what we lost that we will miss what we've gained. Some of your students who've been really marginalized in certain ways in school have actually learned more about their own history, about their families, about themselves than they ever learned in school. So I just want to invite you to think about, as you're heading back to school, what did I, as an educator, learn? And then how could you create space in your classrooms early on in the next couple weeks to get students sharing, what are the things we learned? And then the last question, what do we need to never do again? I suspect, how many of you can think, raise your hand if you can think of something, and I'm not going to ask you to share it out, because I'm not going to ask you to out yourself, but how many of you can think of something that you learned over the last year that we need to never do again? Anybody think of something? Okay, yeah. I got lots of things, but I just want to offer that I think we will miss an opportunity to move forward if we don't take time to really think about what did we learn about ourselves, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. What do we need to stop doing and never do again? And what are the things that we did because we had to last year that we probably should keep doing? Because it actually did work really well for students. It is 48. I would love to open for a couple questions. I have some more things I can talk about, but I would love to open for a couple questions if people have them. And then I'll end with a quote. Anybody have a question for me about anything? Yeah. Oh.
In your travels and teaching in different places, have you noticed differences in application of rules in terms of like hallways, behavior,
So, differences in application of rules to different student groups, is that what you're asking? Yes, so interestingly, there's a district the district I work with in Houston, students have to leave their phone at the front of the classroom. They have like these wall panels that you have to check your phone in. And so they intentionally, at least this was 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, but students would have to check their phones in, which I just thought was like, oh gosh, just imagine if a kid took another kid's cell phone, oh my gosh. As a former administrator, I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. So I've seen that kind of thing. I have seen schools that have very like strict rules, and it's like punish, punish, punish. We want to pound flesh all the time. I've seen that. I don't think that's useful either. I don't think it creates an environment of trust. I was just with the school district Pateros, which is in the eastern side of Washington State last week, and they don't have to have rules in their classroom. But the other reality is they're a really small district, and so everybody knows everybody's mama and daddy and uncle and auntie, which is not like here, right? Like you are in a big school, and so I think the size of the school matters too. But I am a believer that relationship is everything, and so I think the more relationship staff have with students, the less you have to have rules. That's just my personal experience with this, and I've worked in schools. I worked in North Philadelphia. I worked on the hilltop in Tacoma, which is probably the toughest community on the western side of the state. I've worked in North Spokane, which is the poorest zip code in the state of Washington. I've worked in some tough spaces, and what I've found is in those spaces, the more relationship I had with students, I've only once had to send a kid to the office in my whole career. But I will say that relationship is everything. So my students know that I respect them. They know that I will call them in, not out. I'll call them in and say, ooh, Jimmy, I saw you there. Tell me what's going on. And it was very rare that I had to like put the hammer down. What I'll say though is my experience, especially as an administrator, is teachers who didn't have relationship with students were often the ones that were sending children to the office. And so, relationship is everything. So if I were your administrator, which I'm not, one of the things that when I supervised schools, I had 13 buildings in Tacoma and 13 buildings in Federal Way. I told my teachers the first 2 weeks of school, I give you permission to just build relationships. I think, and here's my experience with that, my personal experience with that. When I built really strong relationship with students, there was a way I could call them higher and have high expectations. That if I didn't start with relationship, it was really hard to ask them to do hard things. And what I found is I would spend 2 or 3 weeks just invested in building relationships. My students were always ahead of everyone by January because I invested up front. So some of my teacher friends were like, day 1, we're starting content. We're going to be in chapter 2 by the end of the first week. That's not how I showed up, and I think it's why I got a lot of flack from people. Why are you playing so many games in the first week? Because I want them to trust me. I want them to watch me fall. And I want them to trust each other. I'm going to practice failing in front of them. Y'all, I failed in front of my students in big ways the first couple weeks of school, intentionally. I want students to know it is okay to fall down and fail. I gotta model it. And so that's what I would say. I think the stronger relationship people have with students. And here's the other thing I would offer. For the student populations, I need you to acknowledge which student demographics you are not good at working with. I want you to face that. I think too often we think, oh, I work well with every kid. I love it. No, you don't. That would make you superhuman. I'm just very honest about who I struggle with, and I work really hard right away to build a relationship with them. I work really hard to watch where they sit. So I was that crazy teacher that would spend a lot of time in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria. I would sit and just watch. I just people watch. Okay, who are these kids hanging out with? I didn't do that every day, but the first couple months of school, I would spend time outside watching kids. I'd spend time. Okay, you don't get paid for that time. It's an investment though. It always paid off for me. That I would know, okay, this is how they roll. And because I could do that, that builds really strong relationship with students. So I just want to encourage you to think about, even if you're doing content in the first couple weeks of school, are you doing content while also doing really lots of team building, relationship building activities? That, especially right now, y'all, your students are going to come back struggling with social stuff. And so they're going to fight you with the team building stuff. Okay, that's what high schoolers do. Push through it. They need it as much as you need it. Okay, any other questions? Yeah? Oh, okay, thank you. He's giving me another. We have signals and I totally missed it. Any other questions for me? Yes?
You talk about like investing a lot of time up front and watching kids during lunch and making calls home, and that's all this amazing stuff that I want to do. But I have a hard time balancing that with commitments at home and family and all of that. Do you have advice for ways to do all the amazing things you're talking about and
stay married and keep Yes. So one of the things, first of all, I epically failed at that up front. So I'm just going to honor that just my husband and I, and we had 3 kids. So when I was doing a lot of this stuff, we had 3 little kids at home, and I was the primary caregiver. It was really hard. And so I would say up front in my kids' youth, I was not great at that. I was not great at balancing work and life. Although, here's what I'll tell you, that both of my boys who were stuck at home for college this last year, both of them said, Mom, we watched you invest in other people's children, and we learned how to care about other people. So as much as there have been times where I beat myself up for all the time that I spent at school, my kids were watching, and now they both want to do the same thing, which is kind of cool. So that felt good to hear that, because I really beat myself up. But here's the thing, that as I got later into my career, I would schedule. Each week I'm going to do this many hours kind of outside of my regularly scheduled day, and as soon as that time is up, then I was done. Like the rest is family time. So I am the kind of person who have to schedule it, or I will just find myself like spending 40 hours outside of my work week doing stuff. So that's what I would recommend to you, is think of, and if you don't get through everything that you want to do, show grace for yourself. But I would say have a time limit. Like at 5 o'clock, I'm going to turn everything off and I'm just going to invest in my family, or whatever time that is for you. But I think setting a schedule and just saying, I'm only going to do this many hours, and then show grace for yourself when you can't do everything. It's going to be, you're going to have to figure that out. But timing for me was really important, to scheduling those things was really important. Yeah. Any last question? Okay. I know that you all know that I just wrote a book, and I'm leaving 30 of them here with you all. So I hope that you enjoy the book. It was fun to write. There are errors in it, though, English teachers. I'm so mad right now. Can I tell you, I'm so mad. There are errors in it that are making me crazy. I just want to send them all back. I want to send them all back. So grace for me, please. Okay, grace. But I hope that you will enjoy the book, those of you that get it. Please reach out to me. Some of you already have on social media. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and as you encounter things this year, I'll be back at different times, but if there are questions that you have or thoughts that you have, or you want resources about something, don't hesitate to reach out, especially on Twitter or Instagram. You send me an email, I may never see it because I got like 50 a day. And when I'm done teaching, I don't want to look at email. How many of you are like that? You just don't want to look at email. Keeping it real. Okay, administrators realize that. Okay. But please don't hesitate to reach out, and I will respond to you right away. Thank you for what you do. Have a great year. Keep being amazing. You get to change the lives of young people every day. I'm going to close with a quote that is in my Gmail account. It is the number one job of every adult to be a mirror to reflect back the gifts and talents of the young people who come into our presence. The number one job of every adult to be a mirror to reflect back the gifts and talents of the young people who come into our presence. That's your job. That's your job. Go out and do it. Be treasure hunters. Thank you.
Again, we want to thank Erin for being here, spending this time with us today. She has about a 10-minute break here before we have our next session. And thanks everyone for